Good evening. Welcome to our service of darkness. Before we begin, let me share a few instructions. First, tonight's readings all come from the 27th chapter of Matthew in the NIV version if you'd like to follow along at home. And then regarding the end of the service, at the end of the service there will be darkness, and at that time a bell will toll 33 times, once for each year of Jesus' life. Take the opportunity during the tolling of the bell to meditate and to pray on the darkness that Jesus faced for the sake of us all. The earliest known use of Good Friday is found in the South English Legendary, a text from around 1290. According to the Baltimore Catechism, Good Friday is good because Christ showed his great love for man and purchased for him every blessing. In Hebrews 12, it states that for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame. So even though what we acknowledge tonight is horrific, it is also endured by a God who does so out of sheer love for his creation. Let us call ourselves to worship our Creator, loving Savior, and God.
Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. "I have sinned," he said, "for I have betrayed innocent blood." "What is that to us?" they replied. "That's your responsibility." So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It is against the law to put this into the treasury since it is blood money." So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the Field of Blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand, Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, He's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, Surely he was the Son of God. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb.
In preparing the message for this Good Friday, I've continued to think about Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. For tonight, the very ones Jesus likened to the self-righteous and angry older brother, the religious leaders, are now fulfilling his characterization in spades. No matter how many times I hear this story, I'm always overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of this group of leaders who, in their self-righteousness, heartlessly decide Jesus must die. So much so that they are willing to completely fabricate their charges against him to make it happen. Sadly, stories of betrayal and lies and power-hungry people feeling justified in taking the lives of their enemies is as prevalent in today's world as it was then. There have always been those of us whose lives embody the older brother in the prodigal son. Those who convince themselves of their moral superiority, who pride themselves in their worthiness before God, and who therefore feel justified in showing no mercy to others. Then and now, this is what moral self-righteousness does. it tends to go too far. How do we as human beings, especially those who believe in God, get to this point? What happens along the way that convinces us of our ultimate superiority? What tectonic shift happens in our heart that drives us to such extremes to defend our righteous cause? And what happens to us humans when we allow self-righteous moral superiority to drive us to utter mercilessness? I can only imagine that such thoughts and actions degrade a sacred part of each human, that it mars the image of God within us. That is what sin does. In tonight's story, what does Jesus do in the face of this ultimately human behavior? The Gospel of Luke says that in the face of false arrest, false testimony and evidence, which leads to a guilty verdict, beatings, and crucifixion, after all the fruit the sin of the older brother has borne, with those same people now mocking him on the cross, Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is the second part of the story that completely undoes me. After all that Jesus has been through, when, if anyone has the right to play the part of the older brother and be justified in showing no mercy, Jesus does. Yet he doesn't take on that mantle. Instead, Jesus chooses grace. He chooses love. He chooses mercy. No, instead of being the older brother, Jesus is living out and embodying in this moment of mockery, where he is literally dying because of the false accusations and actions of others, he's embodying the heart of the Father in the story of the prodigal son. Like the Father, Jesus is forgiving them, and more, his very actions on the cross, at this very moment that he's forgiving them, while they stand there mocking him, that is purchasing that forgiveness that he offers them, even as he says it. Here's the good news. Forgiveness doesn't just apply only to arrogant older brothers of that day. It applies for we older brothers now, and the younger rebellious brothers among us as well. What happened that night empowers God to run to us, forgive us, and heal our hearts. Through the cross and the faithfulness of Jesus, God undoes everything that sin has done in us. God undoes everything that sin has done in us. As I was pondering what Jesus accomplished on the cross, this power that's at work in the midst of this horrific evil, I began thinking of the image of a bridge over troubled water. Do you remember the Simon Garfunkel song? When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all. On your side, when times get rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. I'll take your part when darkness comes and pain is all around. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. And so tonight, at the end of our service, during the tolling of the bells, as we remember all the troubled waters in our world today, may each of us take time to truly ponder what the story we heard tonight means for us, for the church, and for the world. How it can heal the darkness in our world and the darkness in our hearts. But this year, don't let it end tonight. Usually tomorrow, what's known as Holy Saturday, is a day that passes fairly normally as we prepare for Easter Sunday. But one blessing that God has provided in the midst of these stay-at-home days is that we actually have the time tomorrow to celebrate Holy Saturday. Holy Saturday is all about joining with the disciples as they waited in spiritual despair and darkness and hopelessness while they tried desperately to keep the faith. As difficult as it may be, allow Holy Saturday to be a time of reflection on what it means to wait on God. For we are definitely in a season of waiting. Allow the uncertainty and the fear and the dread that the disciples must have felt resonate with the uncertainty and fear and dread that each of us feel as we wait out this pandemic. And allow the hope of the anticipation of Easter morning to infuse this season of waiting with hope too. For as Easter Sunday dawns, the ultimate hope arises. Grace has been born anew, and our greatest enemy, death itself, has been vanquished. And I don't know about you, but in these days, that is a message of hope I need to hear. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. "Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first." "Take a guard," Pilate answered. "Go, make the tomb as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard.